Lisa Nelson played a key role. She wasn't just around in 1994. She was the executive director at GOPAC, and the GOPAC training tapes, which went out to some 75,000 people every month, were a key part of how we built the majority, and Lisa was right at the heart of that. So when she came back into public life, I was thrilled that she came to ALEC, and we were just trying to figure it out. I'm not sure which year it was, but I think my first ALEC speech was either 1979 or 80 or 81. I know it was in Chattanooga, but I can't remember which of the years it was. So I've had a long time. I think ALEC, I'm looking forward to the 50th anniversary in October, and I think that ALEC really played a very key role in developing across the whole country a network of conservative legislators who developed and continue to develop innovative ideas. And having a chance to be here, for example, with Lieutenant Governor Sears, and taking her message about school choice, which is a message I first worked on with Tommy Thompson in Wisconsin in the late 1980s, when the original school choice bill in Wisconsin was offered by Jesse Jackson's state chair, who was a woman who had been a single mother on welfare, gotten to be a state legislator, ultimately became the longest serving state legislator in Wisconsin history. And so I've watched the school choice movement continue to grow. And the only thing I would add to it is I do think Betsy DeVos in her new book, and the concept of education freedom, it's more than just school choice. It also means apprenticeships. It also means a wide variety of ways of learning. And I think that's part of our future. But I'm thrilled with the speech we had, and I'm frankly always delighted to have a chance to be back with Lieutenant Governor Sears, who I think is a really great contributor to American public life. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are historically. And some of this may surprise you. I know we're talking at the table here. For example, we actually won, the Republican side actually won 3 million more votes for the House than the Democrats. So everything you've seen in various analytical things, you need to take with a grain of salt and really rethink from the ground up what it is we think we know. I was totally wrong about the election, and I've said publicly that I'm having to take all the models I developed going all the way back to August of 1958, and I'm having to rethink them, because clearly the models I used that led me to believe there'd be really big change weren't right. And I think it's very important to let reality rather than theory guide you in these sort of things. And so I've been spending a lot of time the last couple of weeks. Joe Gaylord, who was my partner in 1994, and I are working on a book called March to the Majority, which is about how we created the majority in '94. And Lisa will have a role in that book. But so we've been talking about, in '94, we accurately predicted on September 17th, 53 seats that we would pick up. We missed one seat. We didn't realize that Ross Stankowski would lose in downtown Chicago. But this year, all of our understanding wasn't accurate. And I think part of what made me confused is that I've been working with Joe DeSantis, who's here with me today, and we have been working on a project called America's New Majority Project, which you can see if you go to americasnewmajorityproject.com, where we list all of our polling data, all of our focus groups. We make it available to everybody. And what really had happened in part was we have a cultural majority that is massive, but we don't have a political majority. And as a historian, it's a fascinating moment in American history. If, like Lincoln, you believe in government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then you have to really wonder if the people culturally are over here, but the political systems are over here, then there's something profoundly out of whack. And I'll give you some examples so you understand where I'm coming from. I'm just going to run through these pretty quickly but I want to use them to make this point. We asked the question, do you agree or disagree with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. that what matters is the content of your character, not the color of your skin? That is a 91-6 position. So when you hear all this talk, all this effort to create a new racist rhetoric, by 91-6, that's not what the American people want. We asked people whether you favored a free market capitalism or you favored big government socialism, 82% preferred free market capitalism. In fact, there's under 1 out of every 5 Americans who favor big government socialism. We ask, how do you feel about the work ethic? One of the major achievements when I was speaker was passing a welfare reform which tied getting resources to going to work or studying in order to go to work, but we quit giving people money to do nothing. So I went back and checked. Well, but all of you can apply this in your states, and you can also apply it in putting pressure on your congressional delegation. 74% of the country, 3 out of 4 Americans, believe that if you get money from the government, you should work for it. You shouldn't just be given it to be dependent. We asked the question about, this goes back to parents and parental rights. 88% of the country, almost 9 out of every 10 Americans, believe parents have the right to know what is going on in the schools. Now, at 88%, every state ought to be able to adopt a law that guarantees the parents of that state the right. Now, everybody on the left, they will fight this bitterly because they understand if parents actually know what's going on in the schools won't be able to be as radically left as they are. But when you have an 88% majority, it ought to work. 87% of the country believes in price transparency in healthcare. That you ought to be able to find out what is it going to cost, and it ought to be clear and simple. Now again, you're going to have very powerful interest groups that oppose that because they like the idea that it would be like running a Walmart or a Costco where they didn't show you any prices until you checked out. And then they didn't quite explain what the prices were. So again, here's an issue where every state has an opportunity to be with the American people. Just 1 or 2 more examples. 84% of the American people believe that the founding ideals of this country are worth fighting for. So when somebody who's woke shows up, and by the way, in terms of the state universities and the state colleges, there should be a very serious effort in every state in the country to figure out what are we going to do about professors who are clearly crazy. I mean, I did a podcast about 2 years ago with a guy named, a strange name, he's Lebanese. His name is Glad Sad, and he's a professor in Canada, and he says that he's lived through 2 civil wars, one when he was a teenager in Beirut, and the other the last 20 years on a college campus. And the theme of his book is that you're not dealing with a political extremism, you're dealing with a mental health problem. That these people are just nuts. Well, I don't know that you have an obligation for the taxpayers of your state to pay for nuts. Now, that'd be a pretty good debate. If you have somebody teaching things that are profoundly false, why are they doing it? And you have, for example, some parts of the country, and this goes back to what the Lieutenant Governor talked about, you have several places in the country now where there's a serious effort to abolish mathematics because mathematics involves a clear answer, and a clear answer means you can be wrong, and if you can be wrong, that will make you feel bad. So in order to avoid you feeling bad, we should not have you learn math. Now, to give you the opposite view, in my office, I have a poster. Clist and I did a movie called 9 Days That Changed the World about John Paul II going back to Poland in 1979. And when we were in Poland filming it, the Solidarity Union, which had stood up against the Soviets, gave me a poster from that period. And I have it on my wall. It's really fabulous. And it says in Polish, for Poland to remain Poland, 2 + 2 must always equal 4. Now, it's a direct repudiation of the scene in Orwell's 1984, where the interrogator says to the citizen, if we tell you 2 + 2 = 5, it equals 5. If we tell you 2 + 2 = 3, it equals 3. We, the state, define truth. And this is the heart of the fight we're in the middle of right now in this cultural civil war between people who believe that there is no truth, there is no abstract ability to define, 2 + 2 = 4, And therefore, you shouldn't teach it because, after all, what if somebody writes 5 and now you're going to make them feel bad because you're going to suggest they had the wrong answer when, in fact, there shouldn't be any wrong answers because it's all relative. And that may sound goofy, but that is a serious intellectual effort. And the question I have is, why would any public school paid for by the taxpayer have to tolerate this kind of nonsense, which is enormously destructive, particularly of the poor? I mean, if you can't learn how to read, you can't learn how to write, and you can't learn how to do math, what is it we're paying for? And yet, in school after school, that's the result. And that's why I think what the Lieutenant Governor talked about in terms of school choice is central to changing the system. So, given all that, I think the great challenge of our time is, how do we return to government of the people, by the people, and for the people? If over here you have, as I hope I just convinced you, and you can certainly go to our website at americasnewmajorityproject.com and see tons of data. If over here you get this massive majority, and 70, 80, sometimes 90%, and over here you have a power structure deeply, bitterly opposed to every cultural value I just described. And how do you then operate in that kind of a world? And what I want to suggest to you is that there are 5 things I can offer you to try to, as key steps in the direction of fixing this. The first one will prove that I really was a teacher. I encourage all of you, if you've not already done it, to buy a copy of Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive, which is 167 pages long. Read it, underline it, reread it once a year until you thoroughly understand it. And the reason I say that is, I first read it in 1969. I doubt if I could have helped create a majority and become speaker without it. And in order for us to build the momentum, we have to learn a level of effectiveness that overcomes the news media, the internet giants, the big corporations, the universities, and the government bureaucracies. Well, that's a pretty tall task. And I think you'll find learning to be effective is a pretty good first point. But then I have 4 specific policy proposals. The first is to take the time, whether in committee hearings or town hall meetings or whatever, take the time to define what the outcomes are that you want. Because what happens to us is we get involved in process. So, are you for education? Well, how much more are you willing to spend next year? Or, are you for the environment? Well, how much more are you willing to regulate next year? But what I want to know is, does it work? And there are simple things. And I'll come back to a second way, an example in just a minute. But so start with the question, what is it you're trying to achieve, not inside the government, but for the society, for the people? And then you come back to, therefore, what is it you want government to do? But you start with the people. Second, once you have defined what you're trying to achieve and you are measuring whether or not you're achieving it, I think the first place you have to look at is the question of entrepreneurship and science and technology. What we don't need are better schools of public administration, because public administration is a disaster. The public administration teaches you how to run a bureaucracy. You don't want to run a bureaucracy. You don't want people who are really good at process. They just don't achieve anything. I'll give you an example out of the federal government. In 1943, we opened the Pentagon so that 31,000 people could use manual typewriters with carbon paper to run a worldwide war. I don't know what I've never been able to figure this out. I don't know what the information exchange rate is between a manual typewriter with carbon paper and an iPad, laptop computer, or smartphone. But it's got to be on the order of 10 or 20,000 to 1. So you still have the same number of people sitting in the Pentagon. Just think about this. The technology has exploded. The capacity to move information has exploded. And I would argue, and I say this as somebody, I'm the longest serving teacher in the senior military, going back to the mid-1980s. You would have a better defense system if you reduced the Pentagon to a triangle. Took the other 2/3 of the building, turned it into a museum of national security, Because what you have today is people who have nothing to do sending letters asking questions of people who have nothing to do, who then invent an answer, which then means that it takes you 10 times longer to build a new airplane. It's absurd. The amount of money we spend on defense for what we get, excuse me, I'm not necessarily for cutting the defense budget, but I'm suggesting to you, you ought to measure what you're getting. The same thing with schools. You know, I don't know why every teacher doesn't have a smartphone that they take the roll on. They report the roll in real time, every hour. I mean, McDonald's collects 37,000 units worldwide every night. And if you go to major big city schools, for 3 or 4 times a year, they have pizza day. And pizza day is the day they're going to count the number of students, and that brings back all the students who've dropped out, who come in long enough to be counted for the purpose of getting money. And then the next day they don't have pizza, so those kids leave, which is good because they're just making trouble. Because we have labor laws which say to a 14, 15, 16-year-old, we know you're not going to be in school, we know you're going to play hooky, and we're not going to allow you to get any kind of honest work, so good luck in the black economy. You want to go out here and sell drugs, you want to go out here and be in prostitution, you want to go out here and do things that are illegal, well, you can't do anything which is legal because you're too young. And then we pay the school for the people who aren't there. We also pay the school for things that don't work. The point that the Lieutenant Governor made. I mean, if 65% of the students need remedial work, one of the easiest ways to start changing that is to charge the high school that graduated them. You know. So look to, and we work, for example, with somebody's going to, I think, brief one of your committees today with Sync Health, which is an example of what I'm talking about. Look to technology, look to entrepreneurs, find things that empower you to get things done. The next thing I would suggest to you is that you have to apply the principles that work. Now, this requires a real argument. I'll give you 2 examples. Excuse me. I really believe in the work ethic. And so I would argue that any law or rule which minimizes work is inherently dangerous. And any law or rule which encourages work is inherently good. Well, if you go through all the various rules, regulations, et cetera, and the bureaucracies you have, you know, when we changed welfare reform in the 1990s, we literally changed every welfare office into an employment office. They went from teaching you how to not work to having to teach you how to go find work. And so I would say that the work ethic ought to be at the, which by the way also means I'm not very sympathetic to students who take 5 or 6 or 7 years to get through a 4-year course. I think they should actually try to get through in 3 years. I think we should be encouraging people to live their lives to the fullest, not to sort of hang out and let life go by. Second, I'm going to go right out on the edge of a limb here. I think honesty really matters. I know this is bold. I mean, I realize that this is actually, let me explain what I mean. The state of California lost $20 billion in unemployment compensation to theft, probably to criminals in the California prisons using California computers. $20 billion. Do you know how many crooks you have to steal $20 billion? The state of Washington lost about $620 million, mostly to Nigerians, who have a new internet-based foreign aid program called We Steal It From You Guys Because You're Stupid. Now, I'm prepared to say that's wrong. The head of the Washington State program and the head of the California program were promoted by the Biden administration to federal programs with even more money. This is really dumb. If you reward people for presiding over theft, why would you be surprised you have more theft? So again, it's bold, it's out on the edge, but I actually think, you know, honesty would be a good baseline for us dealing with things. Finally, I think that it's very important, and this will be very controversial. have a bias in favor of replacing rather than reforming. Because I really believe that some of these systems are so broken that you can't fix them. And you can play games with them and they will simply absorb your reforms and they'll simply continue to be whoever they want to be. And therefore, I think you have to really think about replacements. The railroad was not a reform of the stagecoach. It was a totally different model. And we are at a point in time now, and I'll leave you with this one example. NASA has managed to work with big corporations and lobbyists to spend billions and billions of dollars building a space launch vehicle, and they've gotten one up so far, which is currently circling the moon. And it's very cool. I mean, it's big, about the size of the Saturn V, which went to the moon. Elon Musk is now mass manufacturing a vehicle almost as big for about 10% of the cost. And the vehicle he's building is reusable. The NASA bureaucracy and the lobbyists will die trying to avoid the change because they have so much invested in a program that is hopeless. But it's their program. And that's typical. Every state has these same things. So I just want to close with this thought. We are at a remarkable turning point in American history. Every time the elites have grown arrogant and attempted to dictate to the American people, they've failed. Whether it was the railroads or Standard Oil or the coal miners in 1902 or IBM, go back and look at history. Every time, the American people have this deep belief that Lincoln was right, that this country is about government of the people, by the people, and for the people. You are the folks, ALEC is the organization that is going to carry this message across the country and that is going to enable us to once again reassert that of course we're going to have a great future. We're Americans. We have 330 million free people. And we can outwork, outthink, out-innovate the entire rest of the planet if we just get the bureaucracy and the regulations out of the way, and if we take advantage of every opportunity to encourage people to go out and invent the future. ALEC will be a key part of having that happen, and it's a great honor to me to be able to have been here with you today and to share these ideas. Thank you very, very much.